HighCast episode 24. This episode, as all episodes, is recorded in the studios of Highland FM. Go to highlandfm.org.au so you can volunteer. This Saturday, every Saturday morning at 0800 hours, the Bowral Park Run starts at the Briars. Google Bowral Park Run, get your code, participate. It is a free timed 5K run. You'll meet fantastic people and you'll have a good time. Get down there. This morning, I worked on my Bright Spenders with my wife. Brightspenders.com is a way that you can plan your spending. So this morning, we went through our budget for a fortnight, looked at what we were spending versus what we were planning and adjusting our expenditures. So in the future, we will have money for renovations, for all of the fantastic things that we would like to buy. Anthea, who runs Bright Spenders, is fantastic. She takes you through everything. Go to brightspenders.com so that you can renovate your finances and renovate your life. Our guest today is Joe Crowley. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Joe is a Highlands local and general manager of Barbara May Foundation. Welcome, Joe.
Hi, Dave.
So tell me about Barbara May Foundation.
The Barbara May Foundation was formed in 2009 by local, now retired obstetrician Dr. David Browning, whose son, Dr. Andrew Browning, who went to Chevalier, and sister, Valerie Browning, work in Africa out in the very remote and inaccessible regions of Africa to stop women dying in childbirth, which is very common in third world countries, unfortunately.
And I found the Barbara May Foundation through, I think there was an article in the paper, and immediately I was intrigued because from the Highlands, there is a group of people who have a global footprint. And I thought that's really, really cool. So how did it all, how did it start? What's the motivation for it?
Interestingly enough, in this particular area of maternal health care, which is safe childbirth and the treatment of childbirth injuries, which is a terrible thing called obstetric fistula, which is probably the worst, but there's a lot of other injuries that a woman can get in childbirth that aren't as bad as that. Australians from this area have been at the forefront of work in this area in Africa. Catherine Hamlin is a very famous Australian who actually went to Frensham and came from this area. And she has worked in fistula treatment in Africa for many, many years. And with the Hamlin Foundation, quite famous. Dr. Andrew Browning did work with Catherine when he first arrived in Africa.
And so it started out just as a passion for shared service, or because they just happened to know each other, or?
I think Dr. Andrew wanted to be a obstetrician. He wanted to help. When he went to Africa initially, it was to work in the famines, and he...
So that's in the 80s, is that right? Famines in the 80s or 90s?
I'll have to double check that figure.
We can Google it. Well,
yeah,
I could probably Google it right now.
When he first went there. And I have to go back. I've got the brochure there. I should know. And there's a lot of dates to remember. And then he fell in love with Africa.
Really?
He just fell in love with Africa. He fell in love with the colour, the vibrancy, and the people. The people are so beautiful, and like the Australians are. And he felt that there was so much work to be done in this area. We just take it for granted in the first world that you will go and have a baby, that you will have a safe delivery, that you'll have, well, you know the delivery in itself is going to be a little bit of a chore, but there's great happiness and great expectation around that event in the first world. In the third world, and in Africa, and particularly the regions we work in, Ethiopia and Tanzania, 1 in 12 women will die. And many, many, many more women will be very badly injured. So childbirth is, it's life dangerous, life threatening.
So in 2018, still 1 in 12 women in the regions that you work will die during childbirth. That's pretty. It's hard for people like myself and probably from around the region to quantify that is still a major issue.
I think it is, and of course we have people are used to seeing things like famine, unfortunately, and in East Africa they've been experienced terrible famine. But I think death in childbirth, it's been essentially, we haven't had it in the first world since the late 1800s, so that's how long, and that's because of the simple intervention of a caesarean section.
Yeah.
So, which was introduced in the late 1800s. So, death in childbirth here is rare, but it's interesting because when it happens, it's so terrible for the families that experience this. Sadly, in the countries that we're working in, it is still devastating for the families. Believe me, they don't take it lightly. But I guess it's expected more as a part of the rhythm of life.
Yeah, it's not bizarre. Bizarre's not the right word, but it is really hard to fathom that it's accepted, that it is part of everyday life. Because, like you said, for us, since 1800,
the late 1800s.
Late 1800s, childbirth is another medical procedure, and I don't want to belittle it, but it really is hard to fathom that that's the case.
Well, Dave, I think you've made a great point, and belittling it is what happens because people do just, it's like going, I'm going to go to the shops, going to have a baby, I'm going to come home,
For all
and
you women
not only
out there,
that, I'm going to be in my size 10 swimsuit a week later, and that is how sadly it is more and more being portrayed, and so we are seeing the manifestation, I think, of more depression after birth, because women who may have experienced a more traumatic birth or a more difficult time in getting past it almost feel that there's something wrong with them because, they haven't bounced back to, going for a jog in the morning within a week of having a baby. I think that, yes, that is exactly right. It's a very different
Yeah.
It's a very different thing. And we are providing... So there's a lot of things around what we're doing in Africa, which is changing that paradigm and changing... But, scale is something that will only ever be the thing that changes it in a big way.
So in terms of scale, the foundation is providing the resources for 2 doctors to go over, is that right? Well,
so we've got Valerie up
in
the Horn of Africa who runs an organisation called ADPA, the Afar Pastoral Development Association, and they work across
pastoral development.
Yes, they work across a range of remote and rural issues. Safe childbirth being one of them.
Wow!
So we fund the safe childbirth part of that.
Yeah.
And we built a hospital there, which is our first hospital in that region, and it was the first time nearly 500,000 women in that region had access to a unit to go to.
Wow.
If they had any kind of risk associated with their pregnancy and birth. Previous to the hospital being built, we used to do all the work outreach, and we still do a great deal of outreach, and we train village midwives. So women and men in the villages, and we provide them with kits, and they can and they help the woman give birth more safely in her village and in her home.
That's that again. So to bring it back from our little corner of the world and in the Highlands, an hour and a half out of Sydney. Let's say it's on the other side of the world. You're building hospitals and providing kits. Like that's got to be logistically really, really difficult.
Yeah, and particularly in that area, very logistically difficult. The Ethiopians are just beautiful people, but they have a completely different idea of time than we do. In fact, they even work
African time.
They actually work off a different calendar and time. So, hang on. And I'm getting a bit out of my depth here, but our director, so it's quite interesting. So, but you know what? You just go with the flow and because Valerie has lived there so long, she moved there in the 1970s, and she married an Afar tribesman and lived as a tribeswoman.
Wow. So
She
this is a woman who went to Chev.
No, Valerie didn't. This is Andrew's aunt,
Okay.
David, Dr.
Excuse
David's
me.
sister.
Yes, okay.
So, but she was a nurse in Sydney, and she went
Okay.
over again to help with the famines in the
Wow.
70s,
So the 70s, there you go.
and fell again in love with Africa. I think there's something in the blood there,
Yeah.
and so she ended up up in Malay in the Horn of Africa. Andrew went over sometime later, and I think you're right, the 1980s. And visited his aunt and was blown away by the work she was doing with the tribes. And they're mostly nomadic tribes in that area. So it was also hard to work out the best place to build a hospital.
Yeah.
And to give them the idea that they could come somewhere for a safe birth. And then Andrew ended up working in Bahidar, which is also in Ethiopia, with Catherine Hamlin.
And that's the woman
working
from
in
Frensham.
working in obstetric fistula treatment. And he decided that he would like to try and be the ambulance at the top of the cliff, i.e. stop the injury,
Yeah.
so to provide safe childbirth, so to provide maternity units and more midwives and doctors that could train people locally to provide a safe birth. So we became that. And he still does a lot of work in obstetric fistula because, unfortunately, in Africa, the two go hand in hand in that part of Africa and in the poorer parts and the remote parts of Africa. Andrew's now considered one of the best obstetric fistula surgeons in the world, but understanding that there aren't a lot of them because you don't see it in the first world. So mostly doctors aren't particularly trained in it anymore. So, in fact, with his work internationally, he's training a lot more surgeons in fistula surgery so they can go throughout these remote regions and treat them. They estimate 2 million women have probably had injuries in childbirth that they've been living with for 20, 30 years in Africa, in remote areas, and have just lived that way all their lives, which means they're incontinent, which means they are probably living separate to any family because, as you can imagine, being incontinent and it's pretty smelly and horrible. So you can't really live in a village hut in that kind of thing. So they become ostracised and have to live at the edge of the village. Their husbands often divorce them. They often don't have any live children because they may have had 2 or 3 dead children. And then an obstetric fistula injury trying to have the baby. It just means that the baby's been sitting in the birth canal for a very, very long time.
Makes me feel so worthless.
Oh, no, don't say that.
No,
everybody's got their place in the world.
Yeah, but I mean that with being a little bit facetious. But you hear fantastic stories about people who are doing fantastic things or people who are going through such hardship. And sitting in the Highlands, like what it was a little bit cold when I got out of bed this morning.
Well, I was just telling you about the troubles I've been having with the new floor in my house, and whenever it starts to get a bit stressful, I say, first world problem.
Yeah.
And I think about how blessed I am. So we really... I hate to say we don't know because it's not really the case. I think we do know how
we're just removed
lucky
from it.
we are. We're removed from it.
Yeah.
So anyway, Andrew went on to build, funded by the Barbara May Foundation, we went on to build a hospital in Bahidar, a maternity hospital, which opened last year, 22 beds, which is fantastic. But before that, he had a temporary hospital which had 10 beds, which was a tin shed. And we used to do 2,000 births a year in that tin shed.
Wow.
10 beds. And I'll tell you a funny story. And no maternal deaths. None. Amazing.
That's pretty fantastic.
Oh,
isn't it?
amazing figures. And a wonderful team. They're all local, but we have expats come and teach the locals, but we've got pretty much a fully local team there now. And Andrew was out, I think it was Valerie was out here doing some talks around the place, and she was at North Shore Hospital. And sort of halfway through a talk, the head of maternity came running down and said, "Oh, I'm really sorry, Valerie, I'm so late to the talk." And on the screen, there was a picture of 2 women labouring, and they were in the same bed. They hadn't gone through to have their babies yet, but they were still in labour. They were so busy in the ward, they had them double to a bed. And she said, "I'm really sorry, Valerie. I'm, we're so busy upstairs." And she looked up and she said at the picture, and she went, "We're not that busy." So, I think Bahadar has been an amazing success story, and we do that in partnership with the local health bureau, which is fantastic. So we're working with the local people over there, which is fantastic. So
and I think that's kind of the key to aid, isn't it? It's not just going in there and throwing money on the table. It's making a bigger positive difference to the entire community and ensuring that you're not only stopping a particular issue with childbirth, but that you're educating women, that you're providing extra healthcare services, that you're training doctors and physicians and midwives or whatever it might be, so that where it's a teach a man to fish kind of scenario. Is that what you're aiming at doing?
Very much so, Dave. Yeah. We are all about local impact. We want to be working alongside the community. The sort of impacts we're having, we're employing local men and women. So the impact back on those communities means better education. They have some salaries we pay above award salaries.
Wow.
And we're proud of that. It puts an extra impost on the fundraising, but we feel that we want to be able to give these men and women careers. And we look across our health service provision. It's not just fantastic midwives, but it's doctors. We've had a couple of Australian benefactors fund the education of a couple of doctors over
cool.
there now, of gynecologists and doctors. But it's midwives, but it's also health administrators and the wider community that run a hospital. They become a family, and we're very, very proud of those outcomes. And then because that model has worked so well, we've recently opened another hospital in Tanzania.
Of course you have, because you didn't have enough to do already.
Because we didn't have enough to do. I think Andrew's always got his sights on the next one, but we're all sitting on him at the moment saying, no, just woo. But this hospital was funded largely, the Capitol building was funded largely out of the US by a secret donor.
Hang on. A secret donor?
I can't tell you.
Can you allude to...
A large anonymous donor, we call it, the lad.
The lad.
Well, they're a large corporate famous people over there. So
yeah, okay.
No, I won't say. They have asked us to keep that quiet. So.
But I think that's cool in itself that someone is willing to donate a large amount of money and then just say, look, I don't need the publicity that goes with it.
Funny enough with fundraising, it's now evidenced that you actually get more money if people fess up to fundraising, to donating. Because if Dave Gorman donates, Joe Crowley will donate, and then Joe Crowley's sister might donate, and then but if I don't know Dave's donated, then I'm not going to donate, and my sister, because I don't donate, my sister won't donate.
That's really interesting, isn't it?
So it's very much
the psychology of donation.
Very much, and in the fundraising world, we really encourage our donors to celebrate the fact that they are donating. And to be proud of that, because it's...
How do you be a modest donator?
Well, it's not about being modest, because it's not about you. It's about what you're helping to achieve. Yeah, it's about the impact. So
yeah, I didn't expect to talk about that today.
Well, I think it's a really important part, because we wouldn't survive without the wonderful donations of our supporters, and we really want them to stick out, to put their shoulders back and stick their chests out and go, you know what, I've just saved a woman's life over in Africa.
Yeah, again, it makes me feel not...
And it doesn't cost much, about $200, safe birth.
Really?
Yep.
So for every $200 that's donated, you're effectively saving a life.
And that's all her pre- and postnatal visits
2 lives,
as well.
Really?
Well, you're really saving 2 lives, exactly.
Or more, 2 or
that's
more.
Right. Yeah,
wow.
Well, it might even be more, because... if the woman dies, she may have other children.
Yes.
Oh, they don't have the welfare systems that we have, and so it puts the health and welfare of those other children at massive risk.
And we haven't mentioned Barbara May. She's
Barbara May.
yeah. So the woman that's named after.
Yeah.
What role does she play in this?
Well, Barbara May was Valerie Browning and David Browning's mother.
I'm going to need a family tree.
I know. Yeah, exactly. Barbara May was Andrew's grandmother.
Oh, okay, sure.
Right? And she was a great supporter of her children's work, of which there's quite a few Brownings. There's 8 Brownings altogether.
Oh, wow.
And she always encouraged them to work for the better good of mankind. And she felt that the work that they were doing in Africa was wonderful. And she visited, I think, twice. And she said to her children, I would like you to make it your life's mission that no woman dies in childbirth, if possible. And they embraced that. Wow.
Mum, if you're listening, you've got to give me a greater mission in life. Because it's not something that you like, not to diminish everyone else's life, but that's a pretty fantastic achievement. And was Barbara from the Highlands too?
They originally came from the UK. I think they were British to came in. And I think David Browning came here in his early 20s.
Wow.
Yeah, so they were, yeah.
And so again, from this little pocket of the world that started off with a family of 8 who happened to have some very talented people in their family.
No, I'm just thinking, did she come from there? They might have gone to live in England and then come back. I'll have to go back through the family history. I'm sorry.
You don't need to apologise. But the premise is still the same. So there is a woman who had 8 children, a couple of which who are very talented. I'm sure they're all very talented, but a couple of which who applied their talents in a particular way over in Africa. And then she said, you know what, you're doing something so fantastic. Dedicate your life to it. And then 20, 30 years later, there's hospitals, there's communities that are built around the work of a family from the Highlands. It's a pretty incredible story, really.
It's an amazing legacy, Dave, and one that I think the Browning family should be incredibly proud of. They've got wonderful Christian values, and
is the foundation Christian based, or
yes,
it just okay? Yep,
it is. But having said that, we the women that we work with, any financial background, any religion, we'd never not help a woman regardless of her faith or her financial standing. So, yeah.
Wow, I think you're right. The family should be very proud of what they've achieved. How did you get involved?
Well, funnily enough, David Browning delivered both my children.
Over here?
Yeah, over here in Bowral.
There you go.
And so I knew David from there. And I knew a little bit about the work of Catherine Hamlin and obstetric fistula. And I was always gobsmacked that these poor women went through this, dreadful trial of childbirth in Africa. And then I saw a story in the Good Weekend magazine, actually, about Andrew and David. And I thought, wow, I didn't realise they were doing that in Africa. That's absolutely amazing. And then a friend of mine went to work for them, and then she left and she proposed that I step into her role.
So did you start as general manager, or have you
well, it's only me. That's it.
It's only you?
Yeah, so we're teeny weeny.
Wow.
I work 3 days a week. And Andrew's also returned from Africa now he lived permanently in Africa.
Yeah.
But now he's back here living, but he's in Africa 4 times a year. So he's just done a reverse sweep. So essentially now the foundation is Andrew and I here in Australia.
Yeah, okay.
And he's our medical director. But he will be in Africa a lot. So he's already been back twice since he's been back.
And so we talked about the logistical efforts involved. How do you run what is essentially an international charity from the Highlands?
Well, God bless technology. It's just amazing. But we have a great local board. which is a balance. It's got a fantastic balance of skills around the table. We have obstetrician gynecologist Dr. Sam Hargraves from Melbourne, Samantha. We have a very senior marketing style communications executive. We have midwife on the board. We have David Browning, of course, the founders, Bishop George Browning.
Okay. So
yes,
one of the eight children.
One of the children.
Is it 8
that's
children
right.
or 9 children?
I think it was 8.
Oh gosh, so many children.
I know, there was a lot.
My dad was one of 7, and I thought that was
7.
That was
Gosh,
enough.
I need to do a lot of reading up about the Browning family. There are a few of them. And we also have some very fantastic young men from PricewaterhouseCoopers who have joined our board to make sure financially and from a technical point of view we're all stitched up and fantastic. So they're just wonderful, and PricewaterhouseCoopers have been PwC as they're known today, have been incredibly supportive about providing young directors to so that we've got very modern governance and also a good succession plan within the board. So the board's very involved. And then over in Africa, we have fantastic teams at each of those areas, and we have a lot of faith in our in-country teams, and they're overseen by Andrew, and they're also overseen by their own boards in each hospital.
So when you say in-country teams, you're financially supporting those teams, or
yes, we financially support Bahida almost entirely, the Vision Maternity Care Hospital from here, and we underwrote the operations. We underwrote the entire building of the hospital. The local health bureau gave us a small amount, but we'd always agreed to do it, and we underwrote the operations for 3 years. And we'll review that going forward, but we're still committed to that unit. It's achieving great things. We fund 2 parts of Valerie's work up in the Horn of Africa in Millet. We fund the outreach maternal health care, so that's the women still giving birth in villages.
Sure.
And we also fund the maternity care side of the actual hospital in Millet. And at the new hospital in Tanzania, we are funding... the funding there is still being worked out. The hospital only opened about 3 weeks ago. So.
Wow. Thanks for coming on.
And that's a big hospital. That's got 48 beds, and we will require, that'll be a partnership funding program with other groups. We won't be able to manage that on our own just yet. So
how do you continue? So you mentioned fundraising before. How do you continue to get the funds to do this? We have some fantastic larger donors. Obviously, being a very small organisation, and we're small because we also want to keep our cost of fundraising down. The local health district here is one of our partners in fact, the Southwest Local Health District is one of our partners. Wow! In Africa, they actually provide a lot of the funding for the operations of our hospital. Really, in the Horn of Africa. So the Southwest. So is that government? Yes. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's really fantastic. So they see, and so the Sydney Local Health District is also part of that funding. So together they fund a big part of that hospital in the Horn of Africa, and they see, and that's called the Barbara May Maternity Hospital, and they see that hospital as one of their hospitals. Yeah. Okay. So, and they see that, the thought behind it is that women come to our hospitals to have a baby. They have this wonderful sense of safety and joy around that occasion. So we're reaching out internationally and that comes, I might add, it's not funded by the government. It comes from donations from the staff, just to be crystal clear on it. They're government hospitals. I wondered how that worked out. So they have workplace giving programs. And not that I'm questioning the No, I totally understand that. No, workplace giving program. So it's an opt-in program. So you go to work there and you'll get some information about us. You can opt in if you want to. Because I often wonder about charities, and I look at you're delivering a service. And to deliver a service, you've got to have an income in inverted commas. So do you spend all of your time delivering the service or all of your time getting the income, or is it a mixture of both? It's a very fine line for charities, and as they grow, it becomes the chicken and egg story. Yeah. Do I spend my day
in administration or am I wearing out shoe leather getting money? Doing a fundraising job. Yeah. So every charity faces that balance all the time. And you've seen there's stories in, all the time these days in the media about charities that have flopped more than, they should one way, and the cost of fundraising's gone up to a ridiculous point of view where, they're paying as much to raise the money as they are distributing it. So
it always seems like a very difficult balance. And have you been to Africa yourself?
I have. I went last year for the first time.
Really?
And climbed Mount Kilimanjaro.
So as part of the foundation?
We did it as a fundraising exercise.
Oh, wow.
So 2 other board members joined me in that, and we had a couple of other doctors and some young people from Melbourne who came. And they and we also visited. We did the opening of the Vision Maternity Care Hospital in Bahadar, and we raised the 5 of us who climbed the mountain raised $60,000 for the charity.
Wow. Okay.
So it was a self-funded trip.
Yeah, that's really cool.
It was which is wonderful. And we also went to see the new hospital being built in Tanzania.
And so, do you? We've talked about the family having. You okay? Yep. We've talked about the family having a great sense of self-worth. You must feel pretty fantastic too.
I feel so privileged to work with these amazing people. I have a theory that amongst us walk some pretty special people that I won't get too spiritual about it, but I believe that these people have a way of looking at life that is it's unusual, and it's
you get all spiritual. Tell me about it. Now you've got me all intrigued because I'm a bit of a maniac myself, and I've got pretty different views on the world.
Well, they're so giving, and nothing is about them. It's all about what they can do for their fellow man, and nothing is too hard. And you can imagine Andrew and Valerie faced with the sheer amount of hardship and just hardship in those remote regions and lack of services and they've just kept going. And someone recently referred to Andrew as an unsung hero. And I said, oh my God, he would hate to be called that because they don't see themselves as heroes. A hero is somebody who runs into a burning house and rescues someone.
And they would say, I don't see myself as a hero too.
No, they don't. And also they see themselves as part of this international community that is out there helping the better good of the world. And that is also one of the amazing things. That's quite a big community. And you'd be amazed at how many seriously wealthy people aren't sitting, sunning themselves on a yacht in Corfu, but they are, not that there's anything wrong with that, but they are working in these remote regions. They're putting their time and their money into bettering the lives of those that haven't got the resources.
And this type of story.
And it's very humbling, Dave. It's very humbling to meet them. It's humbling to see it in action. And it's fantastic.
I was going to say that this type of story is the exact reason I started this podcast, because we live in a community of roughly 50,000 people in the Highlands, and we need to know as a community that there are people like yourselves, like the Browning family, that are doing these sort of things as, if not for want of a better word, for inspiration for all of us, so we can contribute either through donating or whatever it is, or doing things like this ourselves. If one person listening is inspired to go, hey, I want to make a difference, and it's whatever in a small way they make their own difference, then that's the reason why I started this. And I assume
Fantastic.
Your story, you want to inspire other people too.
Well, I hope I can be inspirational. I think we can all. I think if you have a passion, then it is easier.
So what's your passion?
Inspire people.
Didn't expect to be talking about this.
No, I wasn't
So-
expecting to talk about
so
me.
as-
Can
as-
we
as
talk about the
usual-
Browning family?
As usual, before a podcast, Joe's like, so what are we going to talk about? And I said, you know what, we're just going to see where it goes. We haven't talked about aliens yet. We might get there.
Oh,
But
alien. No,
but
look, what's
spirituality.
inspiration? Look, I have to say, I was inspired very much by being in Africa. I was inspired about getting out of myself, about being, around the hospital, meeting the women, meeting the doctors, meeting the midwives. I was inspired by what a fantastic life I've had and the privileges I've had and still have. And I hope that I can continue to give back to the community all my life, the rest of my life, in some small way,
That's really fantastic. So tell me, are you a spiritual person yourself?
Yes.
So tell me about your spirituality.
Oh, that's really personal.
Well, you don't have, if you don't feel comfortable, of
no,
course.
well, spirituality. I just feel that spirituality. The world's bigger than me, and I don't think there's enough kindness in the world. I think people are too. I think there's a lot. Okay, I'm going to turn this around. I think there's a lot of fear in the world.
I'm scared. I think everyone's scared.
And I think the fear is getting palatable. And I think generally from fear, comes anger, because...
You could be Yoda right now if you're with Star Wars.
Oh, really? I know, I'm not a Star Wars person, isn't it? Oh, God, I should have invented
From
that.
fear comes anger. Keep going, so I
no,
interrupt.
just if people are... If someone gets angry with you, generally it's because they're afraid for some reason. If you think about it,
Yeah.
So
it's a reflection of themselves
well,
rather
Mum
than...
got angry because I didn't clean up my bedroom, and because she's fearful that life's falling apart because she's getting out of control. The house is just a tip, So
Sounds like my house, actually.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. Generally, anger comes from some kind of fear, and we're seeing a lot of fear in our communities now because I think people feel very powerless. I think there's a lot of fake news out there. Social media is creating another level of visibility and invisibility by the same token. And we have this sense that Big Brother is watching everything we do. And even those people, law-abiding, lovely citizens, feel now that they can't, that somehow they're going to do something right. So they're going to try and log on to Centrelink, for example, because they've got to do something about, and they can't get on to Centrelink and they can't fix the problem that they wanted to fix. So they get angry because they're afraid they can't fix the problem. Now, and then they might get a rude letter from Centrelink because they didn't fix the problem, but they couldn't fix the problem. So there's this terrible helplessness that's sort of permeating society, I think. And I think from that there's a lot of fear, and so people tending to be a little more angry with each other. And that's where the kindness is getting a little bit...
That's really fascinating, because I spend... I'm a quasi-philosopher.
Oh.
And so I spend a lot of time in the car or whatever thinking about things like this. And the point you make about fear, I think, is 100% correct. I think the irony is we live in a time where we have less to be fearful of than any other time in human history. We were talking about childbirth before. Women, apart from the obvious trial of going through childbirth, have very little to fear compared to what they used to. But now, whether it's through social media or through our immediate connectedness, through the news that constantly bombards us, we feel this pressure or whatever it is. And you see it, particularly in news reflected from the United States, that people hate each other. Mm. Or at least the news is perpetuating the idea that people hate each other.
Can I just also make the comparison, and I think this is why people like Valerie and Andrew fall in love in Africa. You don't see it.
Really? Why do you think?
I don't know. There's a simpler way of life. There's a simpler expectation. There isn't the mass consumerism. There is mobile phones, but I don't know how prevalent Facebook and those sorts of things are over there. But there isn't the mass consumerism. There isn't the pressure to, that there's not the economic pressure to succeed,
The pressure to be in a size 10 a week after childbirth.
None
like
of
you were
that exists.
saying
None of that
before.
exists. It's a simpler life. There are simpler people. And you feel that. You go there and there's just this sense of, even with the obvious poverty that you see in even the cities and, in the areas that it's right there in front of you, there's just a general much better sense of joy.
Yeah, I was thinking this morning, I'm at a point in my career where I'm looking at the next role, and it'll be a management role, and I'm like, oh geez, I think I'd just rather move down the coast and have a property near the beach and forget the ladder climbing. And it's a really interesting conundrum. You say it's a simpler way. I was thinking this morning, I feel like we've lost, through all of our gains, we've lost something, whether that's to nature, whether that's a connection to family, whether that's a connection at an individual level. I was talking the other day, how odd is it that you and I are having this really in-depth conversation only because there's some microphones in front of us? Do you really think that we'd be having this conversation otherwise? So it's bizarre that the only way I can, not the only way, but one of the ways I can have meaningful conversations is by saying, here's a microphone.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Let's talk, let's sit in front of it and record it. So we're at a really interesting time in our lives where work like the work that you do, I feel it's not more or less important than it ever was, but it has like the emphasis around it.
Well, yes, it does. But I have to say that, we're all part of a big picture. And I think that whatever job and, career or, world that you live in, I mean, you have, that brings you personal happiness and it brings your community. So I think what would be nice to see, I think some of these salaries that some of these, what
was it the other day?
It was 43 million or something.
Yeah, there was a gentleman the other day who
runs pizzas, something.
Well, the increase was a 37% increase over the period of time compared to a 6% increase over the general staff. Like, it was ridiculous.
And I think those things are starting to impact on people. Read that and they just go, "That's just, how does that work?"
Yeah,
but
inequality.
I'm still going back to your thing about how your next job, perhaps you won't be a manager, perhaps you might, go up the management level. I don't think you should. That's got to be a personal question.
Yeah, I was just putting
and it's very important that everybody, we still have to play our part in community, and we need builders and we need managers and we need banks and we need all these other things that make up a community. So I don't think anyone should ever feel that they're not doing something worthwhile.
Well, I think my point was, what is worthwhile, and how do we evaluate what is worthwhile? And some people would say that being a CEO is worthwhile, and having a salary that's 37 times what my annual staff member would find worthwhile. Some people go, I would like to run an international charity, and I would, I think you said it's about the whole world, and so your values, or what you put value on, is very different from a lot of people, and that's again why I started HighCast, is to bring those stories and say, hey guys, across the Highlands there are butchers and bakers and candlestick makers and the rest, but there are also people who are doing crazy work in Africa. Like, it's
this community here has almost entirely funded the building of the Vision Maternity Care Hospital in Ethiopia. A large sum of the money, which was about 500,000 Australian dollars, to build that hospital came from this community. This community is so giving. Pardon me. Has a huge respect for Andrew, having come from Chevalier. And in fact, he's going to be down here very soon. So he's living on the Central Coast now, but he'll be down here to visit some old friends and his old school in late August. So we'll have to get a few people together to come and have a chat to him.
If you want to have a promotion about it, let me know, and I'm quite happy to.
You might like to talk to him.
Yeah, I think it would be a fantastic story.
That would be great. Yeah, and he can tell you really what it's like on the ground up there. So he did an operation in Tanzania at one of the first, I think the first operation in the new hospital in Tanzania about 4 weeks ago was a woman who had 8 pregnancies and 8 dead babies, or 7 dead babies, and this was the 8th, and it was live. So,
Wow. Okay.
wow. And she was
Put
so
things
happy.
into perspective, right? We got people complaining about Station Street
Yeah.
out there, and like, not to belittle Station Street.
No.
It's important that we have vibrant discussion in the
Yes.
community, but it puts things into perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah.
One woman with seven or 8.
I think she'd had either 7 or 8 or pregnancies that had ended with a dead child, and her being injured in the birth process, and he just delivered her a healthy boy.
So
4 weeks ago.
We can't get council. We don't have council cleanups, and there's arguments over Station Street. There's arguments over the economic plan for the area, and they're important. They're
very important.
Important
they
discussions.
Are important. Yeah.
But then let's bring things back and put it into perspective a little bit, and acknowledge that around the world, what did you say? 1 in 12 women in
well, it's in Ethiopia. Well, in fact, 1 in 12 around the world. In the area that we're working in, that burden is more than half in our area. Yeah.
Wow. So what do you reckon if you didn't do this? What would you be doing?
Ooh.
This is one of my favourite questions. I always like throwing it in there.
I would always like to try. I would always like to do some work in the not-for-profit sector. I feel anything to do with children, quite honestly, to make the world a better place for children. I also think there's in Australia a big need for more work in teenage homelessness and mental health situations. You're seeing a lot of breakdowns of families, and I think that's just a tragedy, because family and the support that family can bring, and once those kids get out on the street, it's just tough out there. The thought of any kid lying down on the pavement to sleep at night, and there's hundreds and thousands of them as we speak, to me it just breaks my heart, so maybe I might do something around that.
If there's any potential recruiters out there,
no, I'm busy with the Barbara May Foundation. No, I'm not going anywhere just now.
So, and
I promised them I'd stay for 10 years, and I've been there 6 years next year, so...
Just getting the feelers out early. And how do people find out about the Barbara May Foundation?
www.barbaramayfoundation.com.
And if anyone wants to donate, can they do it on...
donate securely on the website.
Fantastic.
Or they can also, on the website, if you don't like donating on websites, you can donate direct deposit directly to our bank account, and the details are also on the website. And
have you got any events upcoming that's...
No, but we will have we're having a dinner in Sydney in early 2019. And as I said, Andrew will be down here, and we will be doing an event around that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm quite happy to promote that.
I haven't got my head around what that looks like yet, whether it's a lunch, whether it's a dinner, whether it's a cocktail party or just a chat or something. We'll work it out. Afternoon tea.
Fantastic. Well, let me know, and I'll put it on here and on the website.
That would be lovely.
Yeah,
Thank you. Well, I'm just going to ask you a question.
Go ahead.
So tell me about, where do you want to end up?
Look, that's a really awesome question, and it's something that I wrote in my journal this morning. I change every day.
Oh, you write journals? That's
yeah,
good.
I have a journal that I keep that I will never show anybody ever. it's embarrassing. I change all the time. I think, like yourself, I have this desire to make a difference. When I was a little kid, I had this... I remember watching, I think, a Russian child on TV, and he was talking about nuclear weapons and his fear about nuclear weapons. And I had this idea that if a bomb landed, I would go up into the sky in a part of the planet that was covered in a dome. And so forever, I've thought that my responsibility was to save the world.
Wow,
that's what I was here for. And
wow!
So I play it out in a number of different ways. So I'm an emergency manager now.
That's fantastic.
And I'm an SES volunteer and that sort of stuff. But I'm really challenged in how I play out the save the world part. Like how do you have a career and pay a mortgage and look after the kids and all that sort of stuff, but at the same time have a rich and rewarding intellectual pursuit, a job that pays, it's a real challenge. So at the moment, I'm trying to figure it out. I don't know where it goes, but that's the broad journey is save the world, and it's a very wide freeway of how I could bounce on that journey. Is that a vague enough answer for you?
That's pretty vague, but no, and you'll find your way.
That's pretty vague. Thank you.
You'll find but you'll find your way. I think that's the most important thing, and the fact that you have that passion to be part of that kind of process means that it will find its way to you as well.
Yeah, look, and that's part of it is I started this podcast and I just thought, you know what, there's really good stories to tell. Why don't I just try and tell them? And it's evolved into something that bigger than I thought it would be. And I feel like through this conversation, I'm going on that journey. People may or may not have known about the Barbara May Foundation, and they may not have known about the fantastic work that you do. And if that's the way that I contribute to saving the world, well, then that's my way.
Fantastic. Yeah, spreading the stories.
Yeah, and maybe that's one part of the journey that I need to go on and discover. If I can't save it myself, I can tell stories about people who are.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Thank you. Got any other questions while we're here?
Turning the tables here.
No, I'm more than happy to answer any questions because, to the audience, I get roughly 100 people listening to every single podcast at the moment.
Fantastic.
I'm just some guy on the end of a microphone. Not many people know who I am. So I'm Dave, if you haven't already figured that out.
Well, we'll do a selfie and put it on Facebook. How about that?
Yeah, I think we shall. Have you got anything else, any other ways that you want to promote the foundation?
Well, no, I just thought it was an interesting comment you made about international aid. I think it's, it is, we are part of an international community. People often say to me, how do you raise money for work that's done offshore? And I think, again, Australians are incredibly sensitive to their place as an international...
That's a whole other debate, isn't it? Or not debate, but a whole other discussion. And I sort of thought, well, do I go down that path in this discussion or not? How do we treat people who come to the country?
Different discussion.
Well, but I think it all comes together. So we've seen our international aid budget as a country get slashed,
diminish
significantly over the past 8 years,
about that.
or whatever it is.
About 6 years. Yeah.
People quite often say, "Well, why would I donate to a charity that makes that performs its actions overseas when I should be doing it in Australia?" So that in itself is a really interesting.
And it's a perfectly good question.
Yeah, I decided at that point of the conversation that I would.
I get it
elsewhere.
all the time. I ask people for money and they say, no, we'd like to spend it locally. I say, totally